So welcome to the second month of our Sizzling Summer Series. Here, if you've been around for a while, you know in the summer in Scottsdale, not only does it get hot, but we also lighten up our service in the summers. We do fun topics. And last month, if you were with us, we did the Wizard of Oz. We went on the yellow brick road to freedom, had some fun with that. And this month, we're going to Australia. Anybody been to Australia? Yeah, we're going to Australia, and we're going to follow the adventures of Dory and Marlin in that wonderful Disney Pixar classic film, Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo. Our theme this month is Inclusion in Action, and it's an exploration of the spiritual truth of oneness. We've been talking about oneness all month, and that, of course, is a core belief of the science of mind and our teaching. And today my talk is entitled, What's Your Preference? What's your preference? But first, let's check in with Nemo. If you remember the movie, it opens up with Marlin and Coral, two darling little clownfish, kind of like those two. And they are just so in love and talking about their relationship, and they let us know that they are expecting babies. They've got 400 of them coming, right? All the fish eggs. You know how fish do that stuff. And unfortunately, a barracuda stops by the reef, and he had a little sushi and caviar snack, if you know what I mean. And in the fray, Marlin gets bonked in the head and ends up laying passed out in the bottom of the anemone, their home. When he wakes up, of course, he's frantic looking for Coral and can't find her and thinks she may be down with the baby. So he goes down there to check, and no Coral and no babies. Except he sees one little egg remains. He scoops it up with his fin, he protects it gently and names it Nemo, and he says, I promise to never let anything happen to you. And then we fast forward to Nemo's first day at school. He's so excited to be going to school. So excited, waking Dad up, let's go. And Dad is really cautious about leaving the home, the anemone. And he keeps reminding Nemo, the ocean's not safe. It's almost a mantra that they say, the ocean's not safe, the ocean's not safe. Your universe in which you live is not safe. But he follows him to school, and Dad is, hold my fin, hold my fin, hold my fin. Right? Overprotective helicopter parent extraordinaire, right? Embarrassing poor little Nemo all the way to school and in the schoolyard. They get to the schoolyard, and Nemo begins to meet the kids on the playground, right? It's before school, and the kids are all hanging out. And there is a seahorse, an octopus, and some sort of little pointy-nosed fish that I couldn't find the name of. But they begin to ask him about his fin. If you remember, Nemo had one fin that was smaller than the other one. Right? One fin that was smaller. And the kids were curious. They wanted to know about that. What's it like? And his dad jumps into the middle of the conversation and goes, he was born that way. He was born that way. He doesn't swim very well. The kids go, oh, wow. And the octopus speaks up and goes, I have one tentacle that's shorter than the other. And the seahorse says, I have H2O intolerance. And he sneezes. And then the other little pointy fish says, I'm obnoxious. So they were immediately uniting, weren't they? They were immediately uniting with him and saying, we're not perfect either. They were expressing some vulnerability in that moment. Immediately arrives the teacher, Mr. Ray. He's a giant blue stingray. And he's very happy. And he's saying, we're going to be going on a field trip today. We're going to the drop-off. It's the edge of the reef, where the reef stops and the wide open ocean starts. Nemo is beside himself excited. Dad is panicked. Oh my gosh. Telling the teacher he doesn't swim well. He might get tired. You need to let him take a break for 10 or 15 minutes. Anybody have parents put limitations like that on you? So they take off to the edge of the reef, and Nemo's excited because he wants to see a shark. He wants to meet a sea turtle, right? Something different from his little protected reef that he's been living in. And when they arrive to the edge, the teacher lets them off, of course, and the kids all go to the edge of the reef, and they're peering out to what's out there. And The little kids from the playground, right? One swims off the reef and goes out a little ways. Hey, look at me. Bet you're afraid to do this. Here goes the other one. And he goes a little bit further than the other one. Hey, look at me. And then they start taunting Nemo a little bit. Are you going to come out? Can you come out here? Are you brave enough to come out here? And he goes, sure I am. So he goes out and he goes past. About this time, they notice something in the water. And they go, what's that? And one of the kids says, that's a butt. We would call it a boat. They called it a butt. And they were talking about wanting to touch the butt. And Nemo says, I'm going to do it. And he goes to the anchor chain and he starts swimming up the anchor chain to the boat, and he touches the bottom of the boat and he comes swimming back down. About this time, his dad shows up and his dad is frantic. Nemo, get back in here. What are you doing? You don't swim well. And Nemo's coming back, and about that time, the divers appear. And one of them has a net. And he captures little Nemo. And he goes swimming back to the boat. Meanwhile, as Dad is coming off the reef, another diver pops up at the edge and snaps a photo. Marlin's temporarily blinded by the flash, but he can see that Nemo is going up. And then we see from the surface, Nemo is now put in the cooler, and the boat speeds away as Marlin takes off after it out into the open ocean, chasing his son in a speedboat. Now, you might be asking yourself, what on earth does this have to do with spiritual truth of oneness? Well, from the very beginning of the movie, we see that it's a story about the power of love. We see it between Marlin and Coral and their relationship and their excitement and their enthusiasm about the new babies that are coming. And then we see it with Marlin and Nemo and the love that they have. And while Marlin is a little overprotective, perhaps, and a little bit fearful, his heart was in the right place. He really loved this child of his. He really did. But beyond the drama of the opening scene and the death of a parent, which, Disney has a tendency to do that if you've ever noticed. They have a drama starting out. And then the other drama of the kidnapping or the taking of a child. I mean, that's another horrific drama to put in a kid's movie. But in the middle, that middle scene in the schoolyard, to me, that was inclusion in action, where those kids were they were being inquisitive with Nemo. They weren't trying to be mean to him in any way. His dad jumped in thinking that they were. He wanted to continue to protect him, right? But they were being inclusive. Hey, tell me about that. Come into my group. Let me tell you about me. Like Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. They were saying, I'm not perfect either. I'm not perfect either. Let's be friends. Let's be inclusive. Be in our group. And I believe that we all have this inherent need to connect. Right now we're being less connecting than we have been in community here and probably in our families and friends. And many of us feel that lack of connection. It's something that's part of our beingness, is to be connected, to belong, to unite. Ernest Holmes is the founder of Centers for Spiritual Living, and he's also the author of The Science of Mind, as a philosophy that we teach from. And he says unity does not mean uniformity. Our unity with other people does not mean that we must think and act as they do. All it means is that we should get along with them. We should unify with everything, while at the same time keeping intact the whole, that God spark at the center of our being. Each of those little fishy personalities in the movie, they were individualized, as were their bodies. Their bodies were all different shapes and sizes. Their bright colors were all different. And yet they found a way to unify with each other, to connect with each other, to play with each other, and to help each other, to work together with each other. The sea in which they live, I've always thought the sea was a wonderful metaphor for the oneness of spirit, for the infinite substance that surrounds us always, for spirit that surrounds us always. Holmes also said, we are individual points in the consciousness of God. We are points where it thinks through us, as us. Or as we say, God as man, in man, is man. I've always loved that statement and contemplating that. I remember the first time I came across it and it impacted me in reading The Science of Mind. I was in practitioner training. And I remember reading it and not quite getting it at a deep level. And I asked the teacher, Reverend Catherine McDowell, who was teaching our class at the time, I said, what does this mean? And we had a nice discussion about it, but I still wasn't quite getting it. So I continued to contemplate it and have done so over the years. And it's been expansive for me in the understanding of this idea of what oneness really, really means. What oneness really means. It's much like the idea that God in me, as me, is me. And if you think about a fish in the water, I'm in that water. The water is in me. I'm breathing it, right? It's part of me. It's part of who I am. Now, I think it's sad that in reality on many of our schoolyards today, handicaps are used as differentiations. They're used to select, maybe to discriminate, rather than the inclusiveness that we see in this film. And it may be the color of someone's skin, what part of town they live in, what they believe in, what spiritual path they follow, or who they love. Those can be ways that we select and discriminate. The protests across the nation today are protests against discrimination in the Black community, past and present, and this is moving into the Native American and Hispanic communities now as we see many of the races that have been discriminated against over the years are stepping forward with a voice. They're stepping forward, they're wanting to be heard. If you've had my foundations class, you've probably heard my comments about the timeline of the shifts in consciousness that we see and how things are okay until they're not okay. In this country, slavery was okay until the consciousness of enough people shifted to a tipping point that said, not okay, change. Women not having the right to vote was okay until it wasn't. The consciousness shifted. The civil rights movement, discrimination in that community was okay until it wasn't. And the consciousness, enough people said no. We saw it in 2015 when we saw the equal rights in marriage for same-sex marriages happen. It's okay until it's not. And I wonder if that's what we're seeing today on our planet with all that's happening, is this powerful transformation in consciousness that's continuing to move to a tipping point. I don't know what it is. There's a lot going on, right? We've got political upheaval. We've got racial riots. We've got police violence. We've got a lot of stuff going on. There's this thing called a pandemic, right? There's a lot going on right now that tells me that there's something happening in the consciousness of our planet. I think we saw it initially a few years ago with the excessive fires and floods and mudslides and hurricanes. Have we had more weather in the past 10 years than we have in a while? Drought. Something is happening. Many of us have felt something, but we don't know what. We don't know what it is. But I call it that tipping point in consciousness that enough people are starting to say, change now. I know that even Susan B. Anthony, when she was doing the women's right to vote, the years leading up to the Civil War, she was alive then, she stopped her work because she said, this is more important. This feels more important right now than this, the women's right to vote. So she put her efforts in helping that and then came back to her work that occurred in 1920. There was a lot of suffering in all of those transitions. The Civil War and the things that happened during that time to make that change. The things that happened with the women's right to vote, the suffragettes, the men and women who marched and protested and went to jail for what they believed. For the civil rights and the marches in Memphis and Birmingham and Washington, the protests for the Vietnam War, and the things that happened for the gay marriage rights. All of that, I bless all of those people who marched, who spoke, who did that physical work out in the world. I bless them for their part in bringing change about. It was not easy. There were sacrifices, there was suffering, and there was chaos before the change. That's the one thing we can consistently see throughout all of those milestones, is the chaos that came before the change. Are we living in the chaos? Yeah, are we living in the chaos? Where is your consciousness in the midst of this apparent chaos in which we are living? Where is your consciousness? With the racial protests, with the police violence, the pandemic, and the political upheaval, what's your preference in all of that? Have you asked yourself that? What is it that you have a greater liking for? One alternative over another? Comfort or the chaos of change? Most of us like comfort, don't we? We pray for change, but we don't want to go through it, right? Yeah, we want the goodie on the other side, but do I have to change to get it? Yeah. So we're in a time of transformation. We're in a time that's apparently chaos. If anybody's moved ever in your life, you know what chaos that is and how disorganized everything is. You got to make a mess to clean it up, right? And that's kind of where we are. We're moving. We're moving. As a spiritual community that believes that what we focus on expands, do we believe that? What we focus on expands. It's critical during this shift that we individually and collectively, as Ernest Holmes tells us, stay with the one and never leave it. Our attention can get snapped away into so many shiny objects. Stay with the one and never leave it. Stay focused on the win-win solutions of the Spirit. God doesn't really get into this idea of it's Democrat or Republican, it's black or it's police, it's women or it's men, right? It's all win-win. It's all equal in the eyes of God. We get into that stuff, but we've got to hold our consciousness into that stay with the one, know that we are all in this unity and wholeness of the one, and that we're all equal in the eyes of God. As I looked at win-win this week and focused on that, I'm thinking about what's happening in the world. I've been a little, I don't know what the right word is, concerned about the protests because I do understand and I don't understand. So I ask, what do they want? What are they protesting for on the other side? You know, is it just about acknowledging the past, or is it about acknowledging the current? Is it about what I want to see in the future and change? So my question was, what do the protesters want? And when I went to the internet, I found an article that is entitled, What Do Protesters Want? It's written by Rudolph Busch for the Dallas Morning News. And under his headline, he says, scrolling our phones for news only distorts the truth. Well, that caught my eye because I'm kind of a headline girl. I don't like to get into the details. Plus, there's a lot of it that's false, fake, misleading, sensationalized, right? And to do the research on each and every story to find out what is the truth is really time consuming. So I'm guilty of being the headline girl and going, oh, that's going on, I get the gist of it. But his wording caught my eye. In the article, he says they protest for the big things, deep human things, justice, equality, fairness. I can get behind that. Justice, equality, fairness, a world that works for all. A different world from themselves and those they love. They know there is something wrong baked into the bread of society. Wonderful turn of phrase. The people who are gathered are there in a collective pain about their world and a collective hope that their voices do mean something. In the article, he goes on to talk about the protests that he attended there in Dallas, as well as what was happening over in Fort Worth and the results of that, which were completely different from the Dallas protest. He talked about New York protests and what happened there, Seattle and some of the other, Atlanta and so forth, some of the other areas. And it was fascinating that there's so different in every city and how they're being handled by the protesters, how they're being handled by authorities. And he said that most of the protesters and their leaders don't want violence and looting. They want to be heard. And that's probably been my biggest challenge with watching, is the damage to personal property, to human life, the looting and the stealing and all of that, and the attacks without purpose, more out of frustration. And that's been what's concerning me. It's like, what is underneath all of that? And again, just talking about the leadership of these organizations wanting to be a voice for change, much like our other milestones we've already talked about. The question is, can we hear them? Can we hear them? Or are we distracted by the things that we don't like about how they're doing it? I found read a wonderful quote this week by our community spiritual leader, Reverend Dr. Edward V. Yoon. He said, "Can we be surrounded by differences and maintain our awareness of oneness?" Can we be surrounded by differences and maintain our awareness of oneness? That's a powerful quote. Ernest Holmes, "Stay with the one and never deviate from it. Never leave it for a moment. Nothing else can equal this attitude. To desert the truth in the hour of need is to prove that we do not know the truth. When things look the worst, that is the supreme moment to demonstrate to ourselves that there are no obstructions to the operation of truth. When things look the worst is the best time to work, the most satisfying time. The person who can throw themselves with a complete abandon into the limitless sea of receptivity, having cut loose from all apparent moorings, is the one who will always receive the greatest reward." And that's what Nemo did, isn't it? He threw himself literally into the sea, cutting loose from the moorings of his father, his fear, his protections. And Nemo went on a grand adventure. So let's look at our spiritual principles this week and look at those as our grand adventure. If you've not yet signed up for Mindful Mondays and you would like to receive that, it's additional quotes and notes and thoughts and more and on the practices of our spiritual principles this week. So you can sign up in the lobby. You can send me an email. You can register through our website through the contact list. Just sign up that way. So number one, what's your preference? What is your preference? What are you unifying with, and where are you separating? What are you separating from? So this week I'm going to invite you to look deeply at your preferences. Where are you in unity and harmony with life, and where are you believing that life is separate from you? Is it truly a preference of broccoli over lima beans? If it is only a preference, remember, there's no need to insist that the lima beans be removed from the menu. Okay? Ernest Holmes and Louise Hay both explain that most, if not all, of our trouble is created in our subjective thoughts and beliefs. And then they simply outpicture into the objective reality that we live in. At the subjective level, we're all one. At the objective level, we create all these different things because we're individualized and unique, and it appears that all this is separate. This is a very important philosophy or teaching in our thought system that can help to really support us during this chaos and change that we're going through. Number two, are you anchored in the one? This week, as part of your meditation time, I invite you to contemplate that powerful phrase from the Science of Mind. I've changed it up a bit. God as me, in me, is me, rather than man is the languaging that Ernest used. I decided to make it a little more personal and take it a little deeper in the contemplation. And I think as you do this, if you do this every day this week, and you just contemplate that phrase for yourself, you'll begin to get glimmers of understanding and then continue to go with it and continue to take it deeper and deeper into that royal expanse of oneness. Well, our little buddy Nemo and his new friends at school demonstrated for us in the movie our divine nature, which is unity, and seeking that common unity with each other through their unique handicaps. Our protesters today are demonstrating their unity, and they're uniting in pain and protesting for change. We teach in our communities the power of holding a vision for our lives. Philosophically, is it better to be pulled by our vision or to wait until we're pushed by pain to change? This week I invite you to join me as we unify in the divine, and let's stay with the one and never deviate from it for one moment. Would you join me in a prayer? Recognizing that God as me, in me, is me. We recognize that God is everything. It's all that there is. It is the infinite power, presence, love, joy, peace, harmony, order that is in, through, and as all that is, all that was, and all that shall ever be. And I recognize that all of that power and presence is right here, right now, present in this moment, in this breath, in, through, and as me, and in, through, and as each one of us gathered. For we are all those expressions of the divine. We are all unique, whole, perfect, and complete as expressions of the divine. And so knowing that, knowing our collective oneness, our unity, our common unity, I speak my word for and about each of us. As I know, claim, and accept for us today the truth of our very being. We are love. We are peace. And we are all unified in this love and peace and harmony of the universe. And when we look out through our eyes into the world and see the apparent chaos, excitement for the change and the transformation that is coming. Knowing that it is in divine right order, knowing that everything is unfolding exactly as it should, and knowing that we can do our work in the world of effects and carry a sign and march, or we can do our work in consciousness and be part of that power that reaches the tipping point for change, for a world that works for all. How grateful I am for my knowingness of this, for the manifestation of this prayer. As I release this into the action of law, the activity of mind, we affirm together, and so it is.